Hey everyone, today I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm going to do a double review, 2 for 1. When I received these review copies, I wasn't originally planning on this, but I read them close to each other. They're actually both from the same publisher, and they're both ostensibly on political matters from very different perspectives. And I thought it'd be kind of fun to just do a side-by-side, little bit of a comparison. The two books in question are Religious Freedom, a Conservative Primer by John D. Wiley, and Why Christians Should Be Leftists by Phil Christman. They both were published by Eerdman's. Thank you, Eerdman's, for sending me review copies of these. I have read through both of them, and I'm going to go through my typical format that I typically do with these reviews, and I'll comment on each book in turn. I'll summarize the main idea of each. I'll maybe say a little bit about the authors. I don't want this to get too long, though, so I'll try to keep that short. About the author, main idea of each book. I'll comment on each book's research, each book's readability and style, and then I'll give some final reaction thoughts at the end. So I'm not going to name one of these books like a winner, per se. I'm just going to more talk through it and give you my sense of them, and hopefully that'll help you see if one or both of them might be worth your time. But the authors, quickly, I did have some prior experience with both of them. So John Wiley is someone I've known about for a while. I particularly appreciated his book on American exceptionalism and civil religion. It's very interesting argument, which he's actually arguing kind of for a type of civic religion in America. It's interesting, thoughtful book. But he's someone that I've known of, and I've read articles from him, various sources, over the years, and he's someone that I've known of as a thoughtful conservative voice. And then Phil Christman is someone that I particularly was exposed to through the publication Plow, which is a wonderful publication. And he is I've never read any books by him, to my knowledge. Yeah, I've never read any of his prior books, but he is just an outstanding writer, just on pure kind of skill and talent with words. He's fantastic, and so I was really intrigued to read what he was going to be doing with this topic, because I figured he probably would come at it from a bit of a slant, or from a bit of an unexpected angle, which sure enough he does. I'll get into that in a minute. But that's who the two authors are. These two books are coming in really within, I think, a month or so of each other in publication. They're coming from very different perspectives, as you can tell by those titles. So it's really interesting to read them back to back. Now, the main idea of each, try to summarize this. So obviously these books are about politics, but there are some less obvious things about each book that I want to emphasize in this summary section. So the main idea of John Wiley's book, Religious Freedom, I really don't like the title of that book, because it's not really about religious freedom. It more so is kind of a conservative manifesto. It's kind of a plea. He's making a full-throated plea for conservatism in our time, and he's trying to recover a conservative voice. He's obviously very distressed about our culture, the state of our culture right now. And yeah, he's arguing for what he calls aspirational conservatism. So what he means by that is conservatism that is realistic and yet has ideals that it aspires to uphold. So for him, those ideals sociopolitically come from the ideals enshrined in the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, those founding documents. He believes that conservatives are in a position, because of the conservative respect for handed down tradition, that they're in the best position to uphold those good values and continue to aspire to them, even recognizing that, kind of a realistic sense that, we have fallen short of them, but they're still worth aspiring to. So a lot of his argument hinges on a perspective towards authority and tradition. So I'm going to read a quote from page 23 that I think summarizes what he's trying to do here really well. He says, "My argument for this book is simple. American conservatives are in the best position to articulate and defend the best of the American character by receiving, venerating, applying, and handing down the tradition of harmony between the spirits of liberty and religion." And those two spirits there, the spirit of liberty, the spirit of religion, a lot of his book revolves around the kind of entwining of those two spirits, like appealing to both the spirit of liberty and the spirit of religion that he believes are captured kind of in the best ideals in American history, and that recovering a healthy conservative viewpoint towards authority, towards tradition, towards venerating those ideals is what he is arguing for in this book as the best way forward. So that's my attempt to summarize Wilsey's book. Phil Christman's book is arguing for Christians to adopt a left perspective, a perspective on the left. And his book is... I'll get into this more as I press forward, but his book is less of a straightforward sociopolitical argument than Wilsey's book is. Christman's book is more imaginative, reflective, poetic, meditative, meandering. So it's a little bit harder to pin down a kind of a core thesis statement per se. But I think what I would say about it is this: a lot of his argument hinges on his reading of the Sermon on the Mount, in particular ethics around solidarity, with kind of a universal solidarity with all of humanity, and a sharing of resources, like, which kind of flows out of that solidarity, which flow out of his reading of the Sermon on the Mount. And he is arguing that those ethics are contained in are housed more in a leftist perspective in our current moment than a rightward or nationalistic or certainly Trumpian perspective. He also, the beginning of the book starts in a place that caught me by surprise, but in a good way. He starts with a meditation. The first chapter is basically an essay meditating on how and why people I'm 39 as I record this video. People my age and younger have been so disillusioned with the assumption that conservative politics and Christianity should be wrapped around each other. His first chapter is an essay reflecting on why people are so disillusioned with that phenomenon. And then he moves into an argument that all of us are political by necessity, and so we need to stop pretending that we can't be political. And then that's his springboard into then his specific argumentation about why we should adopt a leftist politic. It's not, I want this to be very clear, it's not an apologia for the Democratic Party. In fact, he's quite critical of the Democratic Party. If anything, he's arguing for more of an economic, kind of quasi-populist, but certainly radical reformational kind of leftist economic restructuring of our politics that he thinks reflect the values and ethics Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount. It's not out and out Marxist, but he does interact with Marx a little bit. But it's more of, in our current moment, something like the leftist economic populism of like a Bernie Sanders type figure that's really arguing for a deeper restructuring and thinking about things along class lines, which that is not what the Democratic Party is, how that Democratic Party is functioning, and he's actually quite critical of that. So I wanted to say that up front, and this is not an argument for Christians to be members of the Democratic Party as it stands in America right now, but it is for a more deeper leftist politic. So yeah, that's my attempt to summarize his main idea. So these two books arguing for very, very, very different perspectives. Now, the research, really quickly, what I'll do is I'll comment a little bit on how each author engages in research, but I do think, I'll say in this category, I think Wilsey's book is stronger. The research, his book is certainly more explicitly academic. It's much more footnoted. It's more, he puts his sources forward kind of unashamedly. He is particularly pulling on thinkers like Peter Weyrich, I think is how you say that, in recovering a certain attitude towards conservative thinking. He interacts a lot with Tocqueville, Alexis de Tocqueville. He actually does really, really good work with Tocqueville. I thought that was really helpful in his book. So, but there's just a lot of endnotes, footnotes, a lot of citations. You can chase down sources deeply. He exposed me to some conservative thinkers. He interacts with someone more recent, like Matthew Continetti's kind of research on the right in American politics over the past 100 years. So he does really solid research. He's an academic. I've known him to be a careful researcher, so that's not surprising to me, but he also pointed me to some sources. I was not familiar with Peter Weyrich, for example. So really, really helpful, really solid work there, and it's stronger than Christman's book, which is not really a totally fair comparison because Phil Christman's book is more of a conversation. It's more of a series of essays in a conversational tone. It's really not trying to be academic. I will say, though, Christman's book interacts with some philosophy and some economic theories, like Marx and Marxian kind of theories, but it's not foregrounded. The research is not foregrounded. He's not trying to necessarily flag particular thinkers and push you to go read them. It's not really the point of what he's trying to do. So I almost don't want to compare them one for one in the research, but I have to say Wilsey's research is just really, really, really strong. Next is the readability of each book, and this one, they're actually both written, I would say, quite well. I think Wilsey is a good writer, a very fine writer, and he engages in a little bit of playfulness, but it has a much more serious tone overall than Christman's book. He does engage with some impassioned argumentation, which I always appreciate. I don't want these books to be completely dry and bloodless. But Christman is just... I said this at the beginning, Christman is so good, and his writing here is so wonderful. You may hate his argument, you may hate the perspective he's bringing to this, but the way he talks it out is so wonderful. The way he uses language is... I think he's very skilled. And I'm going to read... at least I'll pull up at least one quote here to kind of just give you a taste of what he does. Starting on page 30. To be clear, I don't think that we owe more loyalty to a suffering person because that person is a Christian. Part of the point of being a Christian is that you're supposed to unlearn the human instinct to circle the wagons, identify the outsiders, prioritize the in-group. Christianity is a slippery concept in this way. It gives us things in common with other people, but one of the things it's supposed to give us in common with them is the deep conviction that every stranger, every enemy, is a neighbor. And I will, before I read this quote, I will say this book is not a screed against Trump. He names Trump a couple times, but it's not preoccupied with that. This quote does name Trump, though, so I don't want to skew your perception of the book and thinking it's just all Trump derangement syndrome. It's really not, but this particular quote does name him. But I really loved the way he put this. He says, more than anything, Trump proclaims nearly every time he opens his mouth through all manner of self-contradiction a fundamental worldview premised on the idea that misfortune is personally discrediting, ugly, embarrassing, and rightly to be shunned. An economy of winners and losers I well recognize. Trump hates losers. In the incarnation, God broke metaphysics in order to become one. I love that last sentence. There's a lot of other phrases I could pull out from Christman's book because he's just a very, very skilled writer. But I would just say, purely from a readability standpoint, both books are very strong. Phil Christman's is just more enjoyable. I just kind of sunk into his writing, and his it feels like a series of essays, like I said before, but there is a coherence to the overarching argument that builds, and he guides you. Oh, the other thing I loved about in the readability, that first chapter where he talks about all the disillusionment that younger people have felt with the moral majority era, the Falwell, post-Falwell, Robertson, that whole era, the disillusionment people feel, the way he talks about it in that first chapter, I thought was extraordinary. I've read so many think pieces on evangelicals and people being disillusioned with the political right and all of that stuff. And that chapter I thought was so good. It resonated with me and my experience so deeply. And I think if nothing else, if you hate Phil Christman's politics and what he's arguing more broadly, that first chapter is so worth reading to wrap your mind around, to understand the move that people are experiencing politically away from the 80s, 90s kind of era. If you're someone who's confused by that, his writing, I think, is one of the best explanations of it. I will also say, just one final thing before I move to my general reaction, is from a readability standpoint, Phil Christman's book is better kind of comprehensively. The whole book is structured in a way that was more enjoyable to read. Wilsey's book, while page for page, I thought the writing was very good. The overarching structure felt a little wonky to me. It felt more like a disconnected series of essays, like he's just kind of exploring lots of different topics, but I didn't get, other than him arguing for conservatism, I didn't get a very solid through line that really delivered and stuck the landing, so to speak. So that was a little bit of a bummer. Okay, but now let me get to my reaction just in general. You've got a good sense. I respect both these books. I respect both these writers a lot. It's really hard for me to say I straight out liked one more than the other. I think I enjoyed the reading experience of Christman's book more overall. A couple things, I'll say a few things I liked about both. So one thing I liked about Wilsey's was, one thing he did really well actually, is he has a fantastic chapter on nationality and nationalism, and he actually brackets apart 6 different historical examples of different lenses of nationalism and nationality, and how they interact with different conservative kind of theories and perspectives over history. And I really liked that. He really nuanced the kind of whole idea of what does conservatism mean in terms of our thoughts towards our own nationality as Americans. That was really gave me some stuff to think about. He also very wisely has a chapter on how conservatives need to engage the imagination, which I thought was really smart, and I think he's really right that conservative movements have not done that well. I would argue that's part of what's happening in our politics right now, is that, like, Trump, love him or hate him, has captured the imagination of so many people, and I think there's been a real failure on a more right, like, healthy conservative kind of impulse to appeal to the imagination and to beauty, and I really liked his argumentation there. So I think he makes really thoughtful, compelling points in individual sections of the book. I was frustrated I mentioned the structure of the book. I didn't think that the chapters all held together as well, especially by the end, the last couple chapters. I was frustrated by the title, Religious Freedom. I thought it was a very strange title. It should have been titled more just something like Conservative Manifesto or Recover. I don't know. I'm doing this off the cuff, so I'm not going to be very flowery with my language, but something like recovering a robust and healthy conservative politics, or, it's more of just a general kind of appeal, not specifically about religious freedom. So I was really confused by the pitching of that title. I also found he did take a few swipes a few times when he gets into a little bit of polemics that rubbed me the wrong way. That's just going to come with the territory when you're reading a book about politics, so take that for what it's worth. I really liked some individual points he made, but I didn't think the end product held together nearly as well as Christman's book. Christman's book, on the other hand, very, very beautifully written, very well organized in terms of chapter to chapter, very provocative, much more playful and funny and sharp than Wilsey's book. However, but also he didn't, on the other side of that coin though, is he didn't really ground. Wilsey's book is very, like, clear and precise in some of the things he's arguing for. Christman's book is a lot more broad, playful, and he doesn't really argue for, like, a very specific policy objective or even what it would look like very practically. That's going to really frustrate some people who might want that. What this book reminded me of is if a lot of people read this article, I think it was The Atlantic, I'm pretty sure. It was very famous 10-ish years ago. Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote The Case for Reparations. It kind of went all over the place. A lot of people read it. And if you read Ta-Nehisi Coates' writing more in general, Phil Christman reminds me in some ways of him and his style, in the sense that he kind of gets at things he does appeal to beauty and the imagination, and he appeals to broad principles and trying to almost encourage a, like when I read, the article, The Case for Reparations, you expect a bunch of marshaling of data and a bunch of appeals to historical research, and here's how X amount of reparations will repair this particular injustice from X number of, decades ago. And instead, he doesn't do any of that. If you read that article, he does more of a, like, let's all think about this. Let's think about values. Let's think about ethics. Let's think about broad principles. Let's appeal to kind of more broad-minded values than drilling into specific evidence and marshaling all this data. And here's how specific policy. And you can love or hate that way of getting at it. There's pros and cons and trade-offs, all that there. But Christman, that's much more what Christman's book is. So there's, in some ways, apples and oranges. These two books are doing very different things in very different ways. So I really want to emphasize that, as if you're a person who's, like, watching this dual review. They're easy to compare because they're going from different perspectives politically, but the way they're going about it is also very different. And so in a way, they're doing very different things in very different ways. And so Christman does not land on a robust policy program or even partisan program. As I said, he's very critical of the Democratic Party. Instead, he appeals to things, like I said, solidarity, universal care, universal, valuing of the marginalized and the oppressed and those who are othered, and the deeply kind of Christian impulse behind that. And I'm going to end this review by just reading a sentence from the end of his book, in which he's talking about these kind of universal values, universal humanity and dignity and solidarity. And he says, without taking a position on universal salvation, we can make a pretty clear statement about what God wills. God wants all of us. When we stand in solidarity with each other, we are imitating God, who became a person, a helpless baby, in solidarity with all of us. And that gives you a sense of the core value there. And that's really more how he lands his argument, as opposed to landing on a particular voting program or policy. There's my attempt at a double review. 2 books on politics, coming from the left, coming from the right, from the same publisher in the same year, both thinking about things Christianly, thoughtfully, in a well-written way. Both books do things very well. Both books did things I wish they kind of would do differently. But they're both worth spending some time with. So if you're someone who's coming from a particular political perspective and you want to be stretched a bit, hopefully this review gave you a sense of how these books might help you do just that. But wherever you land on all that stuff, as always, thanks for taking a few minutes to watch.